Sandor here for Woodworker's Journal and the Skill Builder series on maintaining woodshop machinery. Today I'm going to show you some of the things that you can do to help maintain your table saw and keep it running smoothly and accurately, as well as operating safely. The steps that I recommend you to perform regularly to keep your saw in top operating shape include cleaning and lubricating its gears and operating mechanisms, aligning the saw's motor and arbor pulleys, and checking its belt and tension, adjusting the saw's tilt angle stops, setting the miter slots parallel to the blade, adjusting the miter gauge and rip fence, setting the height of the throat plate and extension tables, and finally adjusting the saw blade's guard and splitter. Before you begin cleaning your saw, unplug it and tip it backwards if you can onto a pair of boxes that'll support the top and keep the motor from hitting the floor. Tilting the saw's carriage 20 or 30 degrees will give you better access to the trunnions and gears and make the cleaning process easier. Use a brush with either stiff brass or nylon bristles to remove dust, grime, and grease from worm gears, sector teeth, or bevel screws and other mechanical parts. Use a shop vacuum to remove the loosened dust and grime from the inside of the saw cabinet. To keep your table saw's adjustment mechanisms operating smoothly, spray all gear surfaces with a drying spray lubricant, such as Bose Shield T9. After cleaning, set your saw upright and check the alignment of the motor and arbor pulleys using a straight edge, which should lay flat against the face of both pulleys. If the straight edge reveals misalignment, loosen the set screw on one of the pulleys and shift its position on the shaft slightly. Then recheck the alignment with the straight edge. Tighten the set screw on the pulley once the alignment is correct. Next, carefully inspect your saw's drive belt and replace it if it's excessively worn or damaged. Also, check the belt for proper tension and readjust it as necessary. Now, with the table saw still unplugged, mount your best saw blade, one with a nice, flat, clean plate. The first adjustment we're going to make is for the tilt mechanism stops at 90 and 45 degrees. Bring the carriage in light contact with the 90-degree stop and use a tri-square to check the squareness of the blade to the table. If the setting is off, tilt the carriage very slightly away from the stop and use a wrench to move the stop screw as necessary. Now bring the carriage back in contact with the stop and check the setting again with your tri-square. You can use the same procedure to adjust the 45-degree tilt stop using a precision triangle or protractor. Before performing the next series of adjustments, check the fit of your miter gauge in the slot. If your bar has adjustable inserts, tighten or loosen them to make the bar fit snugly in the slot, yet slide smoothly. Now we're going to check to see if the saw's miter slot is parallel to the blade by clamping a stick with a square cut end to the gauge and bringing its end in light contact with the blade. Slide it back and forth and see if there's a gap at either end, using a feeler gauge. Rotate the saw blade around and check the setting again to make sure any variation in the saw plate isn't affecting the reading. If the feeler gauge reveals a gap of more than a couple of thousandths of an inch, you'll want to realign the slot with the blade. On most contractor saws, this is done by loosening the bolts that fasten the rear trunnion to the underside of the table. Now with a mallet, carefully tap the trunnion to bring the blade into alignment. Use the miter gauge setup to check the adjustment, and then once the blade and slot are parallel, retighten the rear trunnion bolts. Now it's time to adjust the angle stops on the miter gauge head. To check the accuracy of the 90-degree stop, cut a scrap of plywood in half. Then invert one of the halves and set them flat on the saw table. They should meet perfectly flush. If there's an angled gap, readjust the stop screw on the miter gauge head and recheck the setting. Now let's set the saw's rip fence parallel to the blade. Start by pressing a couple of blocks that fit tightly into one of the miter slots and bringing the rip fence in light contact with them. Lock it down and see if there are any gaps at the front or back. If there are, go ahead and loosen the screws or bolts that secure the rip fence bar to the front guide. Now tap the bar lightly until it's in full contact with both blocks. Or if you prefer, use a feeler gauge to set a gap of a few thousandths of an inch at the back of the bar, which can help prevent stock from pinching between the fence and blade. Now retighten the bolts that secure the bar to the front guide. Slide the fence over until the bar makes light contact with the saw blade teeth and lock it down. Now reset the cursor so that the crosshair reads 0 relative to the saw's rip fence scale. Now it's time to set the throat plate level with the saw table. Start by backing out each leveling screw so that the plate is lower than the table surface. Set a tri-square or flat block across the plate and raise each adjusting screw slowly until the plate is just level with the table surface. After raising the leveling screws at the back of the plate, make sure that the plate sits solidly and doesn't rock back and forth. Also check each of your saw's extension tables to make sure that its edges are flush with the main saw table, and make any adjustments that are necessary. After reattaching your saw's blade guard assembly, make sure it's in good working order, that its anti-kickback pawls teeth are sharp, and that its kerf splitter is in line with the saw blade. If the splitter is misaligned, loosen the bolts that secure it, realign it, and then check it again with the straight edge. You can keep your saw's table smooth and clean by occasionally removing corrosion or rust with a Scotch Brite pad and a little elbow grease. After cleaning the table thoroughly, treat the surface with a corrosion-inhibiting product, such as Bullfrog Rust Blocker. Performing all the different maintenance and adjustment steps you've just seen may take a bit of time and trouble, but it's the surest way I know to keep your table saw operating safely and at peak performance for many years to come.